Hey everybody! Today we are going to be designing the Matoran, as well as giving you a little bit of a sneak peek at the larger Bionicle project we have in the works. So the Matoran are the intrepid villagers of the island of Matanui. They are innocent, in some cases almost childlike, and in a word, they are the hobbits of Bionicle. So I'm going to be building this on top of a base model that I first built back in 2023. Naturally, in hindsight, there's a number of things that I want to update, specifically the arms and the hands, but the idea is that after that we can use this as a modular base on top of which we can build all of the Matoran. Like a lot of things in Bionicle, there really isn't a singular version of the Matoran. They've gone through a lot of variations over the years, from the Mictoran to the Metronui variants, and I think all of these different designs have little strengths that we can pull from. So what we're going to do today is update the models and showcase some of the hero Matoran in our story. Making the masks for the Matoran is kind of an interesting thing. Of course, with the toys, they were just recolored versions of the Toa masks. But it won't do to have a dozen characters running around a scene with the same face, so I'm gonna take a lot of liberties here. One thing I want to play around with is the idea of negative space on the mask. These characters need to emote, so I think the less of their faces we actually have covered, the more effectively they'll be able to do that. For example, if you look at Lumi here, you can see that I've taken out parts of the mask, reshaped it a bit in a way that fits his character, but it's still very recognizable as a How, and I think this gives us sort of a good roadmap for how we can approach the other Matoran masks. Now, if you haven't realized yet, I am using this project to launder in a fair bit of headcanon, but don't worry, it's the good kind, so this is where we're going to get controversial. Now, of course, none of these characters are actually native to the island. They all come from a very different place called Metronui, and many years ago, the Matoran were put into stasis, and the Toa Metru had to rescue them, bring them up to the surface, and revive them on the island. Now, none of the Matoran have any memory of that event. They don't know what happened before they were on the island. And there's a number of explanations for why that is. I think the prevalent one is that the actual act of being put into stasis wiped their memories of everything before that. But I've also heard some people theorize that maybe the Matoran just don't have a very good long-term memory. And that got me thinking about how interesting it would be to have a race of beings that can live for thousands of years, but can maybe only remember like the last 30 of them. This would explain a lot of things. It would explain why they have such a childlike demeanor. It would explain their dependency on the Turaga. But I think most of all, it throws into sharp relief the importance of documenting history. In other words, chronicling the past. Of course, we're referring to Takua, the chronicler. Now, his profession is to write down what happens, document the past, and keep the oral tradition alive. I like to kind of think of it as a mix between an academic historian and a court jester. Here's someone who can go from Koro to Koro and be seen as kind of a mini celebrity. He will show up at your table, give you a dramatized reading of your history. It is entertainment, and at the same time reminds them all of what they habitually forget. Now, this gives us a really fun framing for his character. You'd have to imagine that this guy's charisma stats must be off the charts. He is a lovable rogue if ever there was one. And from a design perspective, I think this informs us that he has to be somewhat ornate. His armor needs aesthetic engravings, filigree, as nice as they can have it at this point in Bionicle history. And as jovial and theatrical as his life must be, it leaves us wondering, what if there's a darker side to this concept of memory loss? What if there's a reason why the Matoran shouldn't remember? What would happen to a being whose mind is only made for a finite amount of memory if suddenly he remembered everything? Ahkmou was never one of the major characters in the Bionicle story, but I always felt he was one of the more interesting. Here's a Matoran who sided with the evil Makuta and is now conspiring against his fellow villagers, and all that it took to bring him to that place was giving him back his memory. Maybe opening up his mind to the vast reality of the past was enough to induce madness, but one way or another it has led him into a despair that has caused him to hurt all of those around him, and it is very clear that it's a situation that Matoran society is not built to deal with. At this point in their story, the Matoran have no defenders, they have no Toa, and the island is growing increasingly dangerous. This means that the Matoran have to organize their own defenses, which brings us to Jaller, captain of the Takua Guard. Jaller operates what's effectively a paramilitary organization to protect his home, and I think there's something very interesting thematically at this point in the story. The Matoran are living basically as castaways on this island. They are constantly being attacked by the local wildlife. The greater evil of the Makuta is slowly closing in around them. And I think that this represents the period in the Matoran story where they are truly lost. And I think that that's something that can be reflected in Jaller's armor. He's a little bit more weathered, he's seen some action, there's chips and cracks, and you get a sense that there's a story behind all of it. And the centerpiece of it is his branding. Being a part of the Takua Guard has an insignia and a title that are branded directly onto the armor. Now, this isn't the only scenario in which I would imagine the Matoran would have brandings or engravings. I think it would be their version of tattoos. In the same way that tattoos bear, a lot of cultural significance in our own world, I think it would be equally so in theirs. Now, we've been doing quite a bit behind the scenes, and at this point, I want to take a moment to let you guys in on what exactly the larger project here is. There does exist a script that I've been working on over the years that covers the first year of Bionicle. It is 10 30-minute episodes, 300 pages, and it doesn't even reach the Borak yet, so it is fairly in-depth. It would be a dream to get this out there, and someday I hope that I can, but it would also be a dream to think that I can do that right now. What we can do is set the stage for it. So what we're working on is a web series of short films chronicling the period of time leading up to the arrival of the Toa Mata on the island of Matanui. It will be centered on Takua in that period of time in which Vakama banishes him from the village of Takoro, and he is in exile, wandering the island. Through him we will see the island, we'll meet new characters, and it will give us an opportunity to explore this world in a way that I don't think it ever really has been. Hopefully you guys will stick with us as we continue to make videos like this one, as well as these larger narrative pieces, but I really do believe that Bionicle as a franchise has so much left to give. And I really do hope that projects like ours, as well as all of these other wonderful Bionicle fan projects that are on the internet, can open this up to a wider audience and keep it alive for the next generation. So with all that out of the way, I want to give you guys a sneak peek at our future work.